Please welcome our next superhero, Nash Simeunovic. Today, he will be presenting his session, Implementation Methodologies, how to choose and tailor the approach. Please stick around after Nash's session for a live Q&A.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Implementing ERP Systems How to Tailor Your Approach session. My name is Nash Simeunovic. I'm with a company called Reach International. I'm a principal and I lead projects here. I just want to give my sincere thank you to the Dynamics user group and Dynamics communities for helping us spread the word about the products, about the best practices, about making our Dynamics community stronger. With that, let's jump in. Before we get into the agenda, we just want to quickly call out why are we talking about this topic. Nobody wants to watch a project derail due to the poor planning or to the poor execution. That's not on our bucket list. Therefore, the leadership on these projects has to include in leading cross-functional teams, coaching stakeholders, ensuring role clarity across project management, solution architects, and consultants. And that's a tall task, a tall order. So when we talk about all of that complexity and we look at how it impacts the projects and the organizations, we see that these endeavors often make or break the year for the organization. What does that mean? Organizations are typically getting onto the new ERP, they're getting a new CRM when they're ready for growth, or they're getting ready for acquisition, or when there's a change coming. So with that massive impact comes a responsibility that typically some of the most influential folks inside of the organization are in charge of these projects. They're great opportunities for the companies to get to the next level. These are also great opportunities for these individuals to accomplish some major milestones in their careers. And many times when we talk to the folks, when we're interviewing for the roles, people bring up their role and their contribution to these projects. Now imagine leading a multi-million-dollar ERP rollout that was done successfully across 3 countries, across 17 locations. That's a major accomplishment on anyone's watch. With that in mind, we want to make sure we help folks prepare, we help partners deliver better, we help consumers and individuals prepare for the delivery of such digital transformation activities. One more reason why is this topic so relevant. Many companies have published studies on what is the success or failure rate for these projects. For ERP, failure rate is between 65 and 80%, depending on the report. That's a massive challenge, and we're trying actively to decrease that number. We do that by some of the best practices we're going to outline later, but also by educating ourselves how to start the project, how to actually make sure our commitments are made in such a way that we can declare success along the way and at the end. And a third reason why we thought this topic is a good choice is that there are so many rescue or re-implementation projects. In case you haven't been part of one, those come in, or that happens when initiative starts. Clients see that it cannot be successful, the reset has to happen, and either a new team comes in or a restart happens with the existing team where aligned expectations are put in place. Many good reasons, many great opportunities for us to use this topic and project leadership as a discipline to deliver in line with what the stakeholders expect. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and look at the agenda for today. We're going to talk about methodologies and some of the basics, a little bit about history. We're going to compare them. We're going to look at, which project type or what kind of methodology should I use? And then we're going to look at some of the recommendations. We're going to get tactical. We're going to look at what Microsoft is saying, what Microsoft is providing to all of us, and also we'll look at specific best practices to introduce from the beginning so the project can be set for success. I'll encourage you, if you have any questions, write them down, put them in a chat, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Let's get it going. For those of you that have been around for a bit longer, or for those of you that are chasing some cool certifications, PMP is a well-known authority for project management. For many years, they had certification related to delivering projects for what we call PMP. But more recently, a few years back, they've introduced also an Agile certification. So these two are today the two key methodologies for delivering projects, not just in the IT, but across many different industries. We'll look at them in more details, and most of the time when we get involved with companies, one of the two is a preferred one to be used across all of the engagements. Sometimes it's driven by department heads, sometimes at the company level, sometimes there's just a strong PMO group that is driving adoption of a particular methodology. In addition to the Agile and Waterfall, we also have Microsoft that's been providing guidance related to Dynamics projects in particular. About 15, 16 years ago, they introduced a methodology called SureStep, and that's been in use for many years. And Microsoft more recently kind of stepped back or left SureStep out there, but not proactively improving the methodology. We've seen Microsoft mention SureStep 365, which is, let's say, the next step in the evolution of SureStep, but that has not been published, to my knowledge at least, for the masses. What Microsoft does have is success by design. And that's a guidance that should be complementary to the methodologies available. And success by design gives more details on how we should specifically manage certain activities related to Dynamics-related projects. So Microsoft gives us a lot, but Microsoft also does not say, hey, you have to do it this way. Microsoft gives guidance, and Microsoft provides additional support through their fast track team, through product teams, through their support teams to make sure if the projects get stuck, we can count on them for help. The next one, as far as options and flavors, gets a little bit more confusing. Many partners tend to have their own methodologies, and these are typically a mix of the previously mentioned ones, but they have an additional flavor. We've heard of Edge, Quick Start, Express, Rapid for chemical. There's all kinds of methodologies that partners call their own. Underneath, these methodologies typically include some form of Agile and Waterfall, and they include some of the elements added that would be a fit for that particular industry or that particular size of the client. We'll get back to all of these in a little bit when we compare the methodologies, but for now, know that among all of these methodologies, there is a common thread of Agile and Waterfall elements in them. And we'll get into Agile and Waterfall here in a minute to see how they compare. To add to the confusion, many partners prefer to implement, to estimate the work, to talk about everything that's happening from a module or application functionality perspective. So let's say if you need to implement a finance system or accounting system, as many clients call it, we tend to hear a lot about, hey, what is your GL function? Or what functionalities you need around AP and AR and bank and reconciliation. Fair enough. Tons of questions already available that can guide that discussion. However, many clients look at their processes as a driving force behind how the project should be looked at. So record to report is end-to-end process that is another way to look at the finance-related processes. Or order to cash is complementary end-to-end process, or procure to pay. So we see these two different points of view, and we need to bridge that gap. We need to speak the same language. So as we talk about methodology on one side, we also need to make sure we understand how to actually tie the language of the partner that's implementing to the language of the customer that's going to be using the solution. And last but not least, Microsoft has talked about over the years about rapid implementations, out-of-the-box solutions. That means, there's very little complexity. But also, what about those companies that have to have some integrations, that have to have some customizations? Then we have the standard level of complexity, and then we have those large organizations that might need to introduce all of the elements that a typical enterprise level project would do. How do we choose? We'll look at that as well. So when we look at this slide, many times when we talk about these topics, clients are a little bit confused. And they say, well, what should we do? I would say by educating your own team and understanding your level of expertise related to the methodologies and PM best practices, you can pick and choose how the project should be set up. The slide can be used to guide the discussion with the partner, but also can be used to get into the details as you prepare for your project. So to jump into the details, we'll start by just looking at the few elements of Agile and Waterfall and how they compare before we get into some of the specifics related to the other methodologies and approach details mentioned here. A long time ago, some aspects of Lean were introduced into other industries. Actually, didn't even start with IT. But Agile kind of used some of those elements, and Agile practitioners started thinking about how do we actually deploy and develop and deploy software more often. And the whole Agile movement gained a lot of momentum over the last 10 to 15 years. So how it works. We have a product backlog, and that's like everything the solution needs to do. And then we have sprints where we're taking portions of that backlog that we're developing, delivering, testing, and putting in production. This tend to work well, especially with custom software. Today, we have a mature set of tools like Azure DevOps, Jira, and others that can help us see the progress in real time. All of this helps that we can think of Agile as group projects where everyone's contribution is visible and everyone's contribution can be actually seen in a true sense, meaning that it's not like we're reporting things up the food chain and then reporting. It's actually right there where we can see week by week what's happening and are we on track. Agile has been replacing Waterfall methodology that relies on completing phases in order. And the reason for Agile, like mentioned earlier, we have delivery that can be done more often. We can see here multiple sprints, and each sprint results in a value added. With Waterfall, our return investment starts upon finishing the project or initiative and going through the go live. What's tricky here with the systems that we're talking about is that it is hard to isolate a particular feature to be deployed and used without others. So we have to carefully put together our plan that might introduce elements of both. And Microsoft recommends this as well. So now that we know how Waterfall and Agile compare, we know a little bit more about Agile, let's just look at one more aspect of project delivery. And it's actually looking at the whole initiative of what are we trying to accomplish. We said that digital transformation or companies' goals, strategic initiatives, have something bigger in mind. Digital transformation by itself is never the end. It's an enabler for the organization to reach that next level. It's a lot that we can look at to do as part of that initiative of the digital transformation of the ERP rollout. So you can think of it as a program that consists of many interrelated components here. And we can see at the top many of the Dynamics work streams that tend to be part of these rollouts. If I'm not mistaken, there's over 40 different work streams that Microsoft Dynamics 365 can impact. You can roll them all out at once or one by one. That's where the program level comes into play. You have a lot of complexity. Program level management is needed. If it's a single work stream, something that's less complex, we're looking to deploy 3 to 6 months, typically a project management tool set will apply and we can get it done. Now when we look at program versus project horizontally with all these work streams, we're looking here at all the services that have to be taken care of for one or for all. So I'll pick on one as an example, the quality assurance, the second one, that includes the solution testing and includes how do we impact or how do we change and manage the change in the organization is a part of any given work stream that we got to address. So before we release a functionality into production, before the end users start using them, we want to make sure that it's tested. So when you think about these shared services, a lot of streams here, but we're not going to make them into a flood. We'll manage each of the project and make sure each of them is addressed. For smaller projects, it can be pretty straightforward. It can be out of the box. It can be clicking a checkbox. But many times it's more than that, and we're going to pay attention to them. So if you're now thinking, how do I use this? Probably want to get a copy of this slide, put as a side note, and go down the list of shared services as you talk about the project scope, and be very clear who's doing what between the client, between client and the partner, but also potentially with Microsoft getting involved. We mentioned that they have teams that can jump in and assist with some of the workshops, with some of the best practices. Let's go and look at how do we actually select, or how do we think of the size or complexities that are facing our projects. For a long time, Microsoft has been pushing this idea that projects can be of rapid, standard, enterprise size. They provided some guidance how to distinguish where does the project belong. But more importantly, it's not if the project is called rapid or standard, it's what does that mean? So we see typically that as we move from left to right, from rapid to enterprise, we need to have more oversight and more documentation that actually is used to manage the project and to assure that we can deliver on our promises. We tend to say that choosing the right type of the project is like dating. You got to take it slow if it's your first rodeo, but then go all in when you're ready for the commitment. So I'll use a Rapid as an example. You have 10 users, you have few folks in IT, no integrations. Yes, there's going to be a Rapid approach that has very limited number of documents. We might use DevOps to manage the tasks. We'll have test cases all in ADO. And here we go. A couple of folks on the partner side are perfectly capable of delivering it. This is very different from my multinational, multi-location rollout for 350 users for a manufacturer of chemical goods that requires a lot of quality control. Hopefully this helps, and hopefully this slide can help you really narrow down how much documentation is needed, because many times we see partners pushing in specific set of documents regardless of the complexity. That should be reviewed. And also clients should take a look and see what portion of the documentation they should be in charge of. Now that we learn a little bit about types of projects, programs, and projects, we'll learn about Agile and Waterfall. Let's see what Microsoft says about delivering projects and best practices. Agile or Waterfall typically tend to fall, say, to the left or right extreme. But in between, there's a hybrid approach. And when we use a hybrid approach, we have some of the activities that are lined up sequentially. And then we have iterative approach to deliver a certain portion of the functionality. And then we go back to the sequential set of activities at the end. So what do I mean by that? So when we start the project, we got to figure out what is the broad scope of it. And we do the discovery. So followed the next step after the discovery, we mobilize the team, we initiate the project, and we get into the solution modeling. So right here, as we step through these first 4 phases, we tend to set things up for project. And when we skip steps in here, we tend to fall short in our following or downstream activities. And most often what we see is that the clients come out and say, hey, how much would this take? Without doing due diligence to understand the details as far as the processes covered, as far as what software does out of the box, and as far as how much data we're willing to live without as part of this, of the solution being moved to a different platform. When I say how much data we're willing to live without, we typically hear questions like, hey, so how much would it take to move all the data? That's a good question. But while it can be done, it's typically cost prohibitive. Why? Historical data and moving it typically requires more time for longer time periods. So let's say you need a year worth of history. Okay, that's fairly common. But if you need 10 years, over those 10 years, a lot of things have changed. And we have to understand all these different data sets and how to map and transform them and put them into the new system. And that can take tremendous amount of effort. So as we prepare for the project and we get into solution modeling, we then get to understand, we as partners get to understand much better what the client is trying to do. But during that process, we also show the system to the clients so they can understand how the system forces some of the best practices. How is the system envisioned to work, and why is it in use by thousands of customers? As D365 today has at least, I would say, 100,000 customers across CRM and ERP solutions. So there are many, many organizations, and we all feel like we're special, and we could be in certain areas. But for most of the other areas, we probably can benefit from knowing why the system handles a specific process insert. So beyond these first set of activities that set us up for success, now we're getting into actually building the solution. And this is where we can go back to doing it iteratively, or actually doing it all at once. I'm going to go back to the example with Rapid Project, where we have only a small set of users impacted, a couple of consultants working on a project. That could be literally one iteration. They could last for 4 weeks, 8 weeks, and we're ready for final testing and being done. For enterprise projects, these can take many iterations. I've been on some of the projects where we have 30 plus iterations, 30 plus months of rollout activities that lead us towards one or many go lives. So keep that in mind. I would stay away from, hey, we have to be Agile, we have to be Waterfall. I would agree here with Microsoft that we can pick the elements from both methodologies, use success by design guidance, and then come up with what fits our project. With that in mind, I'm going to switch very quickly just to show you what's available to us. So Microsoft has tons of documentation related to success by design. Feel free to use it all. And in addition to the whole website on it, there's a PDF version that describes all the nuances and a lot of good details related to success by design. I'm going to show it right here. This beautiful boat. And just a word of caution, we have about 704 pages of content of what success by design can be and can mean to your project. You're welcome to read it all. What we have for most of our practitioners, we split this up based on the role, and we become experts on what is the best practice related to each. And when we think about success by design guidance, this deck nicely summarizes what are the key elements we need to address, and where can Microsoft best practices help. This particular slide is also taken from that website, and that's being enhanced every month. So the team is doing a great job of continually adding best practices based on more and more projects being done. And this experience is based on, I think, about 3,000 to 4,000 projects that Microsoft got involved with directly or indirectly over the last 5 to 10 years. I'm going to show a couple more things here that you might find relevant. In addition to the guidance, that's a fairly large document, we also have a couple of smaller documents that Microsoft has made publicly available. And I'm sharing this one slide from their success by design versus implementation methodology guidance for us to know that whatever methodology we choose, success by design is there to help. So when you think about it, so what kind of help are we getting? We get the PowerPoints, what's out there? This is where the fun begins. So to make it real, Microsoft has made publicly available on GitHub all kinds of documents that we can use on our projects. And we can see here, Fast Track team is producing these documents, is providing guidance. All of these documents are available to us free of charge just by logging in and getting, actually without even logging in, you can tell I'm not even logged in here. We can get many of these workshops and guidelines and templates for us. Now that we have that, and partner brings a lot of content, we're like, so where do we start? Well, we pick the best from each world. So partners are already typically well-versed with success by design. They have folks who have been through success by design training. They understand how to get Microsoft involved. So we combine what Microsoft is providing and what partner is providing to come up with the best practices. I'll share one more that is dear to my heart, as we've used it many times. And I mentioned earlier, it's SureStep. I hope you can see it okay. The SureStep methodology has been around for a long time. It has a lot of good content, not just the guidance, but the actual content that you can literally use on the projects on day one or on the last day of the project. SureStep provides a lot of good guidance. We see here the roles, consulting roles, customer roles. We can see information flow, tons of good stuff in SureStep. You can use it as a reference. When I talk about documents, I'll just switch here very quickly. So you can see for a particular type of project, which in this case is for all dynamics, standard complexity, we have here all kinds of documents that SureStep provides out of the box that we can use on our projects. Do you have to use it? Absolutely not. Can you use it? Of course you can. And again, this is free of charge. I'll just show you one example. Most recently, we had a client that was familiar with SureStep and says, hey, let's use the role tailored questionnaire. So in this instance, SureStep provides tons of questions to make sure the client actually understands what the analysis and discovery workshops should look like. And I'll just show you a glimpse of what such document looks like. I'll zoom in a little bit and we'll say, okay, for each role, there's a set of questions and topics we could discuss. So I'm just going to go here to Payables Manager and say, okay, if we don't have anything better, we can start with these questions that will help everyone prepare so that when we're doing our requirements analysis, we can actually have a more productive discussion. So now there's success by design guidance. We'll come back to that. We have partners methodology that we should incorporate, especially if they have groomed it for our industry or our situation. And then we have SureStep that can complement that so you don't have to start from scratch. So with all of that in mind, we come up with a few best practices for each project. And these are recommendations. Not every project has to follow this, but we'll just quickly look at what each of them means. So configure first approach is leading us towards those best practices that product brings to the table. Meaning if Dynamics 365 Business Central handles finances for small and medium-sized businesses, typically if you need to process your AR and you're doing it in a very unique way, it's worthwhile to look at how BC does it out of the box and compare that with your unique situation. You might still decide to go your own way and customize that work stream, those screens, or you can say, you know what, let's change so we can stick to what BC does and that'll be our best practice. Aligning with product delivery strategy is interesting now more than ever. We say the only constant thing in life is change. Well, I would add to that another constant thing is that we get updates many, many times, at least twice a year from Microsoft. So if your software will be updated every 6 months, you want to prepare and make sure that your work streams and your functional elements in your solution are aligned with the product delivery strategy. An example of that. Most recently, Microsoft acquired solutions for subscription management. If you didn't know that and you were rolling out that functionality, you probably would have bought an ISV solution, built it on your own, customized the screens. All of those would work. But as these features become available in the core product, you got to figure out what you're going to do for years to come. And even if you built it yourself, would you really want to maintain all kinds of custom code versus getting that functionality for free from Microsoft? So really stay in sync with what the product's delivery strategy is. Microsoft is pretty good at publishing this guidance. Every time the new release comes out, they also publish a roadmap of what is known to become part of the future releases that are coming out in the upcoming years. Okay. The iterative approach, we talked about that earlier. When we see complex implementations trying to go for big bang, we see trouble. And we had a couple of instances. The most recent one, we're helping a client go live here towards the end of the year where they're a third partner. The first two were not successful with this whole big bang approach. And we had to reset expectations where we prepared different parts of the solution at different times. And then we have now major UAT that helps us to complete the testing. And everybody has agreed how we're going to actually turn the system on, not all at once, but we're going to have 2 separate go lives. The last 2, fast release to testing and production, we come back to how small can a manageable chunk of functionality be released to the audience. We often see finance can go completely separate from supply chain. WMS can be a separate component. Manufacturing can be a separate work stream. So by bringing those down or by breaking it down into smaller chunks, it helps our delivery success. And how we measure delivery success? Most of the time, on budget, and on spec. So as our project grows in size, our risks and issues are bigger. So if we can keep them smaller, that benefits us all. Now, while we can have a number of smaller projects executing or being worked on at the same time, having that delivery consistency will help us assure that our end users have similar experience with our rollouts, that our executives have similar experience with our rollouts. So think in terms of we're there for our customers. Who are our customers? We're people who will be using the system, be that on a daily basis or be that for the year-end reporting and forecasting to make major decisions for the business. In both instances, we want to prepare them for a common theme that surrounds successful ERP and CRM implementations. When we talk about best practices, we have to talk about project roles. And I'm not going to go through all the basics of what each of these roles means, but I'm going to call out a couple of gotchas here. For the project managers, many times we see the clients who actually outsource the PM role to a third party or ask a partner to do it for them. Well, that can work. It's critical that we have clear set of responsibilities and authority given to the PM on the client side to make sure they can get the resources that they need. I'm going to go back to the short step very quickly, just as an example, so you can see how we have some of this already outlined for us. So when we think about these methodologies and what Microsoft has been recommending, we see here on the roles side, we have consulting roles and we have a PM, but here we have customer project management, and we have nice description of what that role should do. And then we have even more what skills they have and what their responsibilities are for the project. This is very helpful because many clients, they're doing the ERP rollout either first time or first time in many years. This helps so they do not struggle with finding out what the customer project management role is supposed to do. I want to call out a couple more roles here for us. One is the solution architect role. Many times partners keep solution architects involved up until we get into that design or up until design is done. We tend to keep solution architects throughout the project, even if it's just in the advisory role, because they help us with the handoffs between the phases. So if you can, I would say that's well worth the investment because no knowledge is then lost. Last but not least here, I'm going to talk about the functional consultants in SMEs. SMEs stand for subject matter experts on the client side. A lot of differences with what each role here can do for the project. When I say each role, functional consultant configures the software, provides the best practices, has the industry knowledge. But subject matter experts brings out tons of internal business process knowledge. It's the key that these two sets of project team members actually start speaking the same language sooner than later. And we'll show towards the end here how we can accomplish that. I'm sorry, I have one more tidbit. Quality control or quality analysts, not present on many projects, especially when they're rapid or standard, but we actually see functional consultants doing the QA work, which is perfectly fine. We just want to make sure, again, the role of a QA is outlined and that can be done by somebody else. Okay, a couple more things before we wrap up. When we talk about success of the project, and we talk about perception that the stakeholders will have on everything that we do as part of the delivery. We try to have the cadence with everyone involved. And we talked about different roles on the project. So we'll look at cadence and responsibilities bottom up. So the PM and project management office is responsible for tracking, planning, and reporting. We see here once a week there has to be a checkpoint. That can be a checkpoint for the team and the PM. That's what we see most often. Sometimes a stakeholder pops in to make sure they understand what's going on. In parallel, we like to see that the solution management group led by solution architect, and that again could be a solution architect and one consultant and one SME, or it could be a team of 30 people. They're getting together and making sure they have the cadence and they have full understanding of how the solution is evolving and what that design looks like, or how is that design being implemented. So these two complementary work streams are resulting in the team being able to provide updates to the what we call operating committee and executive steering committee. Many times this is actually a single group, which is fine. We also just making sure that we can understand at which level we're making decisions related to the project. For example, we just finished a phase for one of the clients and they say, you know what, we have an audit, project has to be put on hold for a month and a half. That's okay. That's handled at this level. We're presenting to the stakeholders where the project is. We're confirming that we're meeting their expectations, and we're getting guidance from the business if anything is changing. When we have rollouts that last for 2-3 years, the business will not stand still. A lot of things change in the marketplace. A lot of things can change with the team. We make sure that we're aligned. The best piece of advice I can give here is, if you do not have a status report that includes financials, or you do not have a stakeholder meeting, you're driving half blind. So have the cadence set up from the beginning, and let's make sure, regardless of the methodology, that our approach includes solid communication upstream and downstream. And that leads us to our last portion of the slide, which is, how do we transition this system to the client? How do we actually make sure that the client takes full ownership? And we outline here how the partner's role decreases and the customer role increases over time. And I'm using this somewhat extreme example where one of our clients had a team in place and they devoted 50% of their time to the project, which, by the way, another tip is, if somebody says 50% of the team's time will be devoted to the project, what we do as PMs, we say, okay, then I'll be taking the afternoons, or I'll be taking mornings during the whole week. That way, you know that people are working on the actual project. Why? Otherwise, the project will be pushed aside as there are other activities that are taking people's time. In an ideal world, we have people working on it full time. Unfortunately, for a smaller project, that doesn't happen as often. Use this slide to guide the conversation between a partner and a customer to see who's responsible for what. On one of the earlier slides, I had one methodology that's called Suite Success. It's NetSuite methodology, and I've been involved with NetSuite for a long time. And Suite Success is very cost effective, but on the other side, partner's role is only to guide and coach. Well, that can work, and we can see here in this example, this client has chosen to do something very close to that. Most of the time, it's too much for the client to tackle an ERP initiative, especially ERP initiative, on their own. You got to be prepared for what your team can handle and be very specific what those responsibilities are. And one of the best practices here is, if the client's team is able to demo the solution, you know you're on the right path. And I'm still to see it. Most of the time, client says, yeah, I probably could do it, but can you do it now? And we'll do it later. That is okay, but only for a while. Ideally, we have those SMEs in the system early on. They're seeing the functionality. They're taking over certain decisions, and they're actually demoing the system early on in the process. We have covered a lot of stuff here. I just want to thank you all for attending. I want to say that my mission is truly to enable organizations and project teams to achieve that wow effect. So in our world, the WTF does not stand for something that you might have heard of in the past. It can stand for wow, that was fun acronym. And when we get there, that means our careers, our organizations are in a better place. So with that, thank you all for attending. Let's open it up for Q&A. Hey guys, I hope everybody can hear me okay. We have a few questions here. I'll go in order and feel free to add. The first question is, as an end user, how do we recommend approaching partner management in making sure the partner is listening, in providing the best project management? So we talked about setting expectations. And I'll tell you, when we look at the projects, many times we look at the statement of work and we say, God, somebody here was not transparent enough, and assumptions are not aligned with what
both parties expect to happen. So how do we manage both sides? First, by looking at assumptions and making sure statement of work actually outlines in enough details what each party will bring to the table. An example, if you have a partner that says, hey, we're going to do this, and their bid was 50% lower than everybody else's, rest assured what they're going to do is they're going to come in and they're going to say, client is responsible for creating requirements, for creating acceptance criteria, and for everything that comes after. That's way different than a partner that will come in and do the requirements versus client creating acceptance criteria. Okay, that's halfway, versus a client versus partner that will actually do it all. Very different. Assumptions drive this, and the contractual obligation is what drives the responsibilities. Therefore, assumptions become critical. The roles and handoffs is a second element here. So when you talk about roles, if you as a client do not have a solution architect, that's okay. You want to understand what solution architect's role is for your particular project. Many times solution architects will be there to show you what the product does, will make some strategic decisions, and they will be gone, especially if the project is smaller. Okay. If you think you internally need to bring somebody up to speed, that might be a great time for somebody to observe, to spend time with that solution architect, and then to take over to execute on the vision that was created early on. So assumptions, roles, and I'm going to bring up one more, and that's handoffs. Handoff from one role on the job to the next. I'll use the same example with requirements. Many times, consultant will write the requirements, but the end user will not be able to write acceptance criteria. Why? Because assumption is off with what each party should be capable of doing. So what we started doing is introducing SMEs, subject matter experts, and end users. So that's a end user personnel early on to the product. I mentioned that earlier in the presentation. If you can spend time early on, your design decisions will be much better. But the handoff is, hey, I'm writing a requirement. Okay, I'm writing acceptance criteria for that requirement. They have to match. Why is that so critical? If that's done well, everything downstream will rely on these two elements. If they're not aligned, we're in trouble. Okay? If there's more that you would like to know about this topic, we can go on this one quite a bit, but I think this will give you some good hints to get it going. So that was a question one. The second question is, are we starting to use the business process catalog? It's a very, very hot topic right now. We see quite a few projects that use business process catalog. We've seen it firsthand. We've had both great experience. We also had some challenges. Let me tell you what works and what doesn't. Dumping a business process catalog with 4,000 elements typically does not work. Why it doesn't work? It's overwhelming for a consultant, and especially for a subject matter expert on a client side, to look at that full list and to be like, oh my God, we forgot this, we forgot it. Discussion goes all over the place. If the discovery was done right, you already have a subset of functionalities that you're discussing. So business process catalog could be used to actually cross-check and to make sure that the system can fully support what you need. So best practice, subset of 4,000 processes to be tailored to your project, step one. Step two, if you do the ADO and you say, well, a generic sprint or agile methodology, tie it to the backlog, it'll likely not work. You have to understand how you're going to manage your requirements. So business process catalog brings a lot to the table, but it's a little bit more to chew on, both in like sheer quantity of processes, but also how you're going to manage that downstream. If a partner has a methodology with all the states of the requirements properly identified that you understand, awesome. If they don't, you want to make sure you understand it as an end customer so that you're speaking the same language. Business process catalog is being enhanced, and we constantly see, some of us are on that committee with Rachel Profit. She does an amazing job pushing through and trying to standardize as much as possible. So I would recommend tap into it, but make sure you don't get overwhelmed. That was the second question. The next one is, do we recommend combination of Waterfall and Agile? Tech loves Agile, users understand Waterfall. Do you try and explain Agile? So I think this the presentation will be shared and it will be available to all of us. We force education early on about the methodologies. So we agree on which elements will be in use. The slide that talks about certain steps being sequential, aka waterfall, and then going iteratively into some of the development integrations. Data migration is often done iteratively. We recommend 3 iterations of data migration. That's what you want to agree to. It is not, hey, here's Agile Manifesto, use it. It is, hey, here's a guideline for our project. Let's all adhere to the recommendations and agree how we're going to manage it. You do that well, you're off to a great start. If you don't do that, everybody will be bringing their whatever they read on the internet about best Agile practice or best waterfall practice, best ERP practice, and then the confusion will occur. So what we typically provide, if we use ADO, which we use most of the time, the DevOps, we provide that guidance with states for each requirement, with how actually user stories should be written, what acceptance criteria looks like, what elements have to be handled afterwards. That brings us all back to everybody speaking the same language, okay? So if a company has to go, for a variety of reasons, has to go Agile all the way or Waterfall, we adjust the guidance and we ask the key stakeholders to sign off that they take responsibility for managing their team's understanding of that particular methodology. We see it all the time, especially with large organizations. If you're in a Fortune 500 subsidiary, they typically do have some guidance they have to adhere to. And especially if they're in a regulated industry, you might not even be able to touch Agile as much as you might want to. I think that was the 3rd question, and I see the LinkedIn and email. I'll put them in right away, and then we'll start wrapping up. While I'm putting in my contact info, please feel free if you have any other questions, put them in the chat. We'll be more than happy to spend extra time and make sure I give you everything I know so that your project is success. I truly mean it when I say making a living off of doing a lot of these rescue projects is not fun. Everybody's mad, people feel cheated. When we come in, we got to readjust and then get it done right. So if we can do it right the first time, we're all going to be telling so many more good stories about the product and about the technology that it's enabling our success. All righty. With that, everybody, thank you for your time. I'll stay on for a few more minutes and we'll put my contact info in the chat. Thank you.